I need to get out there, for instance, to the BlueCAPS is focusing on the development of communities in South Georgetown. That could be an area of focus. Hence, you have to craft your message to say, well, for instance, this is where we are, this is what we're doing, what are our target groups, what will be the benefits. A skeleton. And then you can brainstorm it among the key persons in your organization. And then you may wish to come up with a release, a press release. We'll come back to the press release in a few minutes, just as how we come back to the report. But as you listen to me, I want you to take into consideration this. And this is called the inverted pyramid. So yes, you decide in your organization what exactly you want to say. You may craft it in the form of a press release that takes into account the structure called the inverted pyramid. But you may also want to engage the reporter in having an interview done. You as an organization, you have to be in control. You, the spokesperson, you have to be in control of the message. So therefore, you have to be prepared in making yourself available for the interview. What is your message, and what are some of the likely questions that the reporters will ask you? Because while the reporter will agree to have the interview done, you must also be prepared for the unexpected questions.
So what if I don't have the numbers?
And I answer the question directly. I'll start with the fact that it was a press conference today. Had the president been open to an interview, a one-on-one interview with someone, you don't have to provide, the reporter is not bound to provide the questions to you, the spokesperson, or in the case of the head of the organization, Mr. Perley, or whoever. But the reporter has perhaps a duty and an obligation to say what are the broad areas that the interview will focus on. If indeed, however, the reporter needs specific figures on a particular area, then he also, or she also has a duty and an obligation to say, well, I would like to have information on how much you spent on the pumps from Surrender Engineering, as was the case today, and what was the cost of the spare parts, and so on. So Mr. Erling or the spokesperson doesn't come unprepared and ends up with an answer that's like this, right? So the reporter has a duty when it comes to statistics and figures to ask you beforehand to provide that information. It is not qualitative information, it is quantitative. Therefore, you cannot make mistakes, or you ought not to make mistakes with numbers. And when you provide figures in an interview that are accurate, it lends to the credibility of your message. So it's both parties working together to ensure that the message is credible and it reaches the audience in a way that it can be easily understood. So, having decided what is your message and so on, you may agree to the interview, as I said, or you may decide to send out a press release. And the press release can be sent out using the database that you would have accumulated, all of the email addresses and so on for the various reporters. Or you may go the old-time route, which is not very good because we operate in a digital age, and therefore a lot of our work has to be done within a specific time frame. Hence, it is important for you to disseminate the press release electronically. That is email. Coming back to the inverted pyramid, the least important of the information is at the bottom. So as we get higher to the top, it's the most important information. Therefore, in starting off your press release, your first sentence needs to be no more than about 40 words. And it needs to grab my eyes. If it doesn't grab my eyes, I'll probably put it in the trash bin. I'm telling you, that's what happens a lot of the times. not necessarily by me, but a lot of my colleagues. So your sentence needs to be eye-catching, it needs to be grabbing, it needs to have the message that we want to portray. And you can go on and you can research this some more on your own, you can practice sessions on your own, but I'm just giving you the basic tools of the trade from their perspective. And the second paragraph needs to have a quotation, a direct quote from someone who has an appeal to authority or an appeal to importance in your organization, or someone who is specifically tasked with a particular project. Because at the end of the day, your message has to be credible, and there are certain elements that journalists and reporters look for, and one of them is appeal to authority. Right? So your second sentence needs to have a direct quote that supports what you would have said in the first sentence. And then you can go on now to provide details about the project or the subject area. And as you go lower, you provide less and less important information. Why? Because if you're in a situation where the reporter is rushing for time or space as it relates to broadcast or newspapers or online, you're going to start cutting from the bottom. And if you decide to cut from the bottom, then at least most of the important information will still get into the publication, so it will not be lost. So always bear that in mind. It must be grabbing or attention getting. It must have an appeal to authority. Of course, it must have credibility. And very important, it must be timely.
Dennis, could you expand a little on credibility?
Yes. Because any shade of information that might be questioned in your press release can result in the entire press release being questioned. So your information must be accurate, including statistics, which I referred to earlier. And you must not concoct information in an effort to get it to the media, because it doesn't help you in the long run. Therefore, you must ensure that your message is credible and stand up to scrutiny. It must be timely. And I say timely because, let me use an example. BlueCAPS may want to talk about what is going on in the city council. I'm sure you have discussed that in a not so distant past. And you may want to issue a statement on the state of the municipality. Therefore, your statement has to be...
Thinking about the issue that the mayor now and the town clerk.
Right, yes. You don't want to issue this statement another 3 months because you won't get any traction. If your statement is timely and it comes in the midst of this discussion, discourse, controversy, whatever you like, you're likely to get a lot of play in the media. Once the release is structured properly and you have a forceful message, you cannot just find yourself just adding to the discussion for the sake of adding words. You have to have a forceful message, because we tend to become very weird. And I'll tell you the honest, to use redundancy, we'll tell you the honest truth, is that we sometimes get very weary hearing the mayor speak, because he says some things over and over again, and we deal with news. So you've got to come with something that's very forceful, that's very credible, that's very timely, that will add it to in a constructive manner to possibly the solutions. Yesterday, I won't say where we were, but Mr. Erling and I were at a particular venue, and I recall telling a number of persons that I didn't hear anything new. All I heard is what has been said for the last 2 years in a long speech with no solutions. We've got to be solutions oriented, You've got to pitch ideas in your press releases and so on. That said, this press release is written in the best form, in the best fashion, it is credible, it has all of the elements, the structure is fine and so on. But
hi, I wanted to ask something. In the case of the inverted pyramid, we start with the most important.
yeah,
And we would usually call that line lead.
yes.
What I wanted to know, in the case of doing press releases, do we also adapt using the technique of the 5Ws and the 1H?
As far as possible, but please do not cramp your lead to exceed the 40 or so words. Why? It is not good for writing style, that is one. It's two. Some people just rip the releases and read them. And in the realm of broadcasting, you can't read comfortably a sentence that is more than 40 words. You start to lose your breath, and you start to lose the attention of the listener. So yes, I take the point and the $5 and the 8 is who, what, where, when, why, and how. So that is always standard in basic news writing. So your colleague is right in saying so, but please guard against very long designations in your opening paragraph because they can take up so many words, like head of the presidential secretary and the cabinet secretary. So many words you've gone with there already. So you have to find a way to style it, to structure it. You can say senior official of BlueCAPS, or you can say BlueCAPS, and then you can go into the second paragraph, and then you can say the who. You can use the after inverted commas to say the who in BlueCAPS. So as I was about to say, you can get the best structured press release, the perfect press release that goes out to the media. Some may decide to use it as is, but never, 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 ever run away with the thought that your press release must not be questioned. The reporter has a right, a duty, to call you and ask you for a clarification, additional information, and they even ask for an interview based on the release. It is up to you to decide how you handle that. But never, try not to say no to an interview or to clarifications, because it may not help the process. Your release may not necessarily make the media as much as you think it is the best release sent out. Also, do not expect necessarily that your release will be reproduced in the same manner that you would have put it out. The reporter, the editor, has the right to choose a different angle or a different focus from within the release. Although the ideal is that you expect your release to be published as is. That is your organizational expectation, but it's not our journalistic obligation to reproduce it as it is. So, in the release, it should be in your letterhead, so it has your contact information, and if indeed there's a spokesperson, as there should be for the organization, you need to add it at the bottom of the release.
Dennis, this question came up during my presentation already. And there's a fine thin line when it comes to, we're trying to get our message out in a particular slant. And then the editor decides to frame it in a different manner like you're saying. What if they framed it in such a way it did not capture what your intention was? How would you recommend organizations? There's not just BlueCAPS here, we have different other organizations
Right.
here. How should we treat, or how should we deal with such an occurrence when it happens?
Well, there are a number of ways you can deal with them. Principally, you can't defy the editor. So just put that one aside, right? You may need to offer yourself up because you're building sources and you're building contacts in the media. You may wish to issue a subsequent release or to contact your source, your reporter contact, and say, look, we're doing X, Y, Z, and we probably thought it'd be good to have some additional information on this particular subject, which may have been the subject of the earlier release. But you now have to prepare yourself to provide a lot more information so that your approach now becomes very fresh in the mind of the reporter. It's not history, we're dealing with news.
Yeah.
So you've got to find a way to provide a lot more information. You've got to put a lot more effort to pitch your focus. But don't ever say no to a follow-up interview or to a clarification in the press release, please. Because you want to build good relations. You don't want to destroy.
Don't ever say no to those.
Right. And that is why you always need to be prepared for an interview, or if you're brainstorming and constructing the release, what are some of the possible questions that may arise? So always be prepared. This is how the reporter is expected to be prepared. You've got to be prepared. So we are a bit off of this for the time. All the little tidbits. You're going for an interview in a radio interview. I will focus a bit on that. Do not find yourself taking away the mic from the interviewer. Some people do that. Yes. It is not your role, it's not your function. And generally speaking, reporters should not like it, because it takes away the control that they have over the process. It is I to review. I am in control tonight. And you do not seek to arrogate onto yourself that responsibility. That is one. In the area of television,